Hi, I'm Andrea Forte from Drexel University. I'm here to present on behalf of my co-author Shruti Sannon at University of Michigan. We did some work together about privacy research with marginalized groups. We conducted a systematic literature review of CSCW and adjacent communities to investigate what we know, what's needed, and what's next in this area of research. So we know that privacy violations hurt some groups more than others. For example, if you have your location inadvertently shared, this might be a real threat to you if you're a survivor of intimate partner violence, if you're an immigrant, if you're a political dissident or a protester. There are lots of groups for whom privacy violations can create really dire threats. So when we talk about marginalized groups and privacy, we're talking about marginalized adults being people who face any form of social exclusion or discrimination based on features of their identity. So race, sexual identity, gender identity, socioeconomic status, immigration status. There's lots of identity characteristics that can lead to discrimination and bias. And that's what we mean when we talk about marginalized groups. So what research has been done and how has the research been done? Those are the two areas that we really wanted to understand better. So what research has been done? What groups have been engaged in privacy research? What can we learn from when we look across findings? What are the themes that emerge? And then also, how have we as a community been conducting this work? What can we learn from ourselves when we look at our methods and identify best practices for conducting research in this area? So the way we went about doing this was we collected a bunch of papers, a few thousand, about privacy across HCI and social computing related venues, communication and privacy and security related venues. And then we took a number of steps to filter those down and identify those that were specifically to do with privacy and marginalized groups. So you can look into the paper to see details about how we went about identifying that final data set of 88 papers across HCI, communication, and privacy and security. So one thing that immediately became clear is the number of papers has increased. So we looked at 10 years, and most of the papers we analyzed were really in the last few years. This is an area of increasing interest across these research venues. So what did we find? Some of the themes that kept popping up across the literature had to do with privacy-related tensions. So protecting privacy versus disclosing identity, protecting privacy versus seeking support, privacy versus autonomy, individual versus collective frames for thinking about what privacy means. These are all discussed in detail in the paper. Another way that we analyzed the content of the research across these 88 papers was to look at how the privacy responses that these papers identified in marginalized populations. So when someone from a marginalized group is experiencing a privacy threat, how do they respond to that? What's the privacy response? And then what are the costs and consequences of that response? So here we have on the slide, you can see there are 10 different responses that we identified. And the first one is apathy. So you might not do anything when faced with a threat. And the cost associated with that is that you're continuing to be exposed to that threat. Another one is non-use. So deciding not to use a technology or deleting your account on a platform. That goes along with the cost of opportunity loss, potential exclusion from whatever's happening in that group, in that platform. You're silenced in those channels. You're not there anymore. You're not saying anything. And you may be isolated if those were avenues for social contact. So we go through all of these privacy responses with examples from the literature. If you could see the whole big, giant page full-page table with examples from the literature about what the costs and consequences of these different privacy responses are. So those are, what are we studying? Now, how are we studying? What are the methods? And what kinds of considerations should we be taking into account when we do this work? So a couple of highlights: ethics discussions, a lot of talk about ethics discussions in the air, but not so much in this literature. Only about half of the papers actually included ethics discussions. Compensation is an important feature of studies that actually involve participants, and even more important when you're talking about marginalized groups that may be suffering from socioeconomic disadvantage. So of the 73 studies that actually involved participants, again, only about half talked about providing monetary compensation. Many of them didn't talk about it at all. And that's a problem. If we don't write about it, it doesn't become a norm. It doesn't become a standard. So you're going to see that that's one of our recommendations. First of all, our recommendations for what we're researching and filling understudied research gaps. So you'll see one, if you look in the paper, you'll see that race was very conspicuously not there when we looked at what marginalized groups are being engaged in this literature. Not much on race. Broadening our approaches, so targeting things like policy implications is an important kind of contribution that we could be making as a community. Let's diversifying methods and questions, the ways that we're going about research. We have a particular repertoire, particularly in CSCW, but also in adjacent communities, and diversifying that would be good. So we also have recommendations for research practices, how we go about doing it. First of all, planning for and reducing harm among marginalized groups can't be said enough. And don't just do it, write about it, write about how you're doing it. Likewise, compensation, report compensation, write about it, get it into the literature, make it a norm. Considering your own positionality, so who are you, and your identity characteristics really affects how you look at research problems and how you go about doing research. So considering who you are and why you're engaging with the problem that you're seeking to solve is a part of that, and it's something that can enter into our research canon more consistently as well. So these are our key contributions, these 4 points I just went over. They're discussed in much more detail in the paper, and of course Shruti and I would always welcome further discussions. Here's our contact information, and thanks for being here today.